Okay, so let's move on to the next sutta. Now this, I didn't even know if I was going to come to the sutta, but here we are. So this is the Chetawan Sutta, the lion's roar, turning of the wheel. So this is a little bit different from the sutta we have seen so far, because the suttas we have seen so far are very much involved with practice, and are very kind of talks about things which are very relevant to what we have to do as Buddhists and how to practice the Dharma and these kind of things. This sutta here, DN26, this is a very different type of sutta. It has a long part of it, which is like a parable or a myth or a legend, if you like. It's a big part of the sutta. And it's quite entertaining, quite interesting as a myth. And of course, like all myth and legend and parable, it has like a moral to it. They're trying to impart a kind of a statement about how we should live our lives through telling a legend, through telling a parable. And it also has some serious Dharma things as well. Well, somebody, this is from the DN26, but somebody pointed out a while ago that the DN26 seems to be a collection of discourses that are meant like to be more entertaining and sort of help people who are not really Buddhist yet to understand the Buddhist teachings. And that's why there are so many parables and teachings that are not really core in Buddhist teachings, if you're not yet. This is one of these teachings. Chetawan, the lion's roar, or turning of the wheel. But it's getting late now in the weekend, and I think it's rather nice to have things which are a little bit more entertaining than what we have had so far. So, as usual, please ask questions as we go along here. Thus have I heard it. Once the Lord was staying among the Magadans at Matula. Then he said, monks, the Lord they replied, and the Lord said, many monks, be islands unto yourselves, be a refuge unto yourselves. We know of the refuge. Let the Dhamma be your island, and let the Dhamma be your refuge. We know of the refuge. And how does a monk dwell as an island unto himself, as a refuge unto himself? We know of the refuge. With the Dhamma as his island, and with the Dhamma as his refuge, we know of the refuge. Here the monk abides, contemplating a body in the body, energetic, clearly aware, mindful, having put aside desire and aversion for the world. He abides contemplating feelings, certain feelings and not feelings. He abides contemplating certain states of mind and not states of mind. And he abides contemplating certain principles among principles. Energetic, clearly comprehending, mindful, having put aside desire and aversion for the world. So, this particular saying that you see here, this is also found in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And you know, Mahaparinibbana Sutta is the sutta which talks about the Buddha's last days and also his passing away and the funeral ceremonies and all that afterwards. And that is found there. And there it is very fitting, because there you have Ananda who is asking the Buddha, what's going on, what's happening, you're looking sick, how are you going to pass away? And he was getting worried that the Buddha was going to pass away. And then the Buddha said this to him, that it doesn't matter if I pass away, because you should be refuges unto yourselves, and you should take the Dhamma as your refuge. And this is again important, because it's the same thing I've been saying all this time about where the final refuge should be. The final refuge is with oneself and with the Dhamma. You have the Dhamma with Buddha, and you have to make inquiries, you have to ask what the teachings really are, and find out for yourself. You cannot rely on other people. Sometimes people say to me, but surely, there are teachers out there that are much wiser than me, so if I get some good advice from those teachers, then that will be helpful. And it can be, but remember, the person who chooses the teacher is you. Because you're not choosing the teacher, in the end you are still relying on yourself. It's your judgment that chooses that teacher. So you're still relying on yourself. So in the end, that is what it comes back to. It comes you have to rely on yourself. And that's why it is that self-reliance plus the reliance on the sutta is what the Buddha mean, of course, that one cannot have other teachers. It just means that in the end, the final reference, the final refuge is the Sutta itself. And then he says that you do this by practicing really the four foundations of mindfulness. Because when you practice the four foundations of mindfulness, you are applying that Dhamma. And it is in this way that you are abandoning the defilements when you are seeing things clearly. Then he says, keep to your own preserved ones, to your own ancestral homes. If you do so, then Mara will find no lodgment, no foothold. It is by building up a wholesome state that this merit increases. So keep to your own preserved. This is the Gopchara. It's like Satipatthana, they call it Gopchara of the monk. Gopchara quite literally means go with cow, and Chara is the kind of where the cow kind of stays. It's the staying place of the cow. So Gopchara is where the cows are. It's like the pastures of the cows. So the pasture of the cow is one thing, the pastures of a monk or a Buddhist practitioner is another, of course, Satipatthana. This is where you're supposed to hang out. This is where you're supposed to be. This is where you're supposed to spend your time in the four Satipatthana, says the Buddha. Your ancestral ones, in other words, your teachers, like the Buddha himself, he spent time doing Satipatthana. So by following the tradition, basically, following what other people did before you, that's what he means by ancestral ones, like the ancestors of the Dhamma, like our teachers going back to the Buddha. So these are the real following the path, basically, of others. If you do so, Mara will find no lodgment, because what you're doing by practicing the Satipatthana is that you have already abandoned desired unwholesome states to a large extent. And the Satipatthana then purifies you further to abandon these things completely. And when they are abandoned, then there is no Mara, there is no tendency anymore to go the wrong way and to be inclined in the wrong direction. It is just by the building up of wholesome states that this merit increases. And this is explained towards the very end of the Sutta, what is meant by this, what this merit increases is meant is explained at the end. So we'll have a look at that at the end when we come to it. And now we have this long parable that comes from this point on. And part of what this parable points out, it shows you one way what happens. It's one way of showing what happens if you don't keep to your ancestral homes, if you don't practice Satipatthana, if you don't increase and build up wholesome states, if you are slacking, this is one of the things that you can expect to happen there. So that is what this parable really tells the monks. So be careful. And I will point out a number of things in this one as we go along, particularly towards the end, which are interesting, I think, and which everybody really needs to reflect on them. Once there was a wheel-turning monarch named Brahmali, the righteous monarch of the law, conqueror of the four quarters, who had established the security of his realm and was possessed of the 7 treasures. These are the wheel treasure, the elephant treasure, the horse treasure, the jewel treasure, the woman treasure, the household treasure, and 7, the counselor treasure. He had more than 1,000 sons who are heroes of heroic stature, conquerors of the hostile army. He dwelt, having conquered the sea-girt land with stick and sword, without stick and sword, by the law. So this is the legendary monarch of Buddhism, the kind of the ideal ruler, the ruler who is righteous, who practices his kingship according to Dhamma. And remember that what is meant by Dhamma here, the righteous conduct, it is not the Dhamma of the Buddha, of insight into non-self and all that. What Dhamma means here is like righteous in the moral sense. In other words, he's kind, he's good-hearted, he practices the precepts, it's just the moral Dhamma. So Dhamma, the word Dhamma depends on context. And sometimes it just means law or morality in the very general sense. And that's what it means here. So it says that it was a righteous monarch, but Pali word is Dhamma the Dhamma, the righteous monarch. So, and he had these 7 treasures. These are like the mythic treasures of ancient India that people had. And they were like special powers that somebody who was a very special person would acquire. So these were like, super normal, basically, treasures that they were supposed to have. Again, it's part of the mythology of this monarch. It's not clear whether such a monarch has ever existed, but it's a mythology to make points about the Dhamma. That's why you have these mythologies. And then, so he conquered everything. And this is why he was a Dhamma king, because he conquered all the land without stick and sword, but by the law. In other words, he conquered it without violence. He conquered it by using the Dhamma. The Dhamma was so powerful that he was able to conquer it by that. And after many hundreds and thousands of years, King Brahmali said to a certain man, "My good man, whenever you see the sacred wheel treasure has slipped from its position, report it to me." "Yes, sire," the man replied. And after many hundreds and thousands of years, the man saw that the sacred wheel treasure had slipped from its position. Seeing this, he reported it to the king. So the sacred wheel treasure, it's not really clear to me exactly what it means. Some people have said it's like the sun or something like that it shouldn't really slip from its position. But basically the wheel treasure is something which arises for the king, and then it sort of stays above his palace. And when the wheel treasure falls down, it means that the king is sort of losing his power, and it's a sign that he has to make some change in his life. We'll see more about this afterwards. So he reported this to the king. Then King Brahmali sent for his eldest son, the crown prince, and said, "My son, the sacred wheel treasure has slipped from its position, and I have heard say that when this happens to a wheel-turning monarchy, he has not much longer to live. I have had my fill of human pleasures, and now is the time to seek heavenly pleasures. You, my son, take over control of this ocean-bounded land. I will shave off my hair and beard, don yellow robes, and go forth from the household life into homelessness." And having installed his eldest son in due form as king, King Brahmali shaved off his hair and beard, donned the yellow robes, and went forth from the whole household life into homelessness. And 7 days after the royal sails had gone forth, the sacred wheel treasure vanished. So here you see, this is like the typical, the ideal king who rules in the rightful way, in a good way, and he is so unattached to his power and to his authority in the presence of kingship. And when he becomes old, he renounces everything, and he becomes a ascetic instead, puts off the monastic robe, the yellow robe, as it says here. And there is another sutta in the DN26 called the Sutta, which tells of this story in much greater detail, the splendor of the great king who has absolutely everything. It is explained in great detail the amount of wealth he has, the amount of kindness he has, how he is loved by the people in the land. He has everything, and yet he renounces. And the point, the lesson in this kind of thing, the lesson is that it doesn't matter how much you have in the world. It doesn't matter how much sexual pleasures you have, how much power you have, how much fame you have, how much loved you are by the people around you. Even if you are at the very top of the world, still, it is preferable to renounce and live the life of an ascetic. This is the morale we like here. So when a king who lives 80,000 years, who is tremendously wealthy, tremendously powerful, and righteous and kind, when he gives up the whole life, then the point is, well, shouldn't really other people do it as well? That is the morale behind this. So then, he does that, he goes forward. And of course, it's a very difficult thing to do. We should never underestimate the power, or the hold that power has on a person's mind. It's very addictive to be in a powerful position. So it's very hard. That's why this sort of king is put on such a high pedestal. So the wheel treasure vanished. Then a certain man came to the anointed Katya king and said, so the anointed Katya king, now that's the son, right? The son was taking over now. "Sire, you should know that the sacred wheel treasure has disappeared. At At this the king was grieved and felt sad. He went to the royal sage. The royal sage is like the old king went forth, right? He's now the royal sage, and told him the news. And the royal sage said to him, "My son, you should not grieve and feel sad at the disappearance of the real treasure. The real treasure is not an inheritance from your fathers. But now, my son," I'm retranslated a bit, "now, my son, conduct yourself in the noble conduct of a real treasure." A slightly different translation. And then it may come about, and if you perform the duties, if you perform the noble duties of a real turning monarch on the fast day of the 15th, when you have washed your head and go up to the veranda on top of your palace for the fast day, the second real treasure may appear to you, thousands both, complete with pillow, hut, and all appurtenances. But what, sire, the son said to his father, the sage, but what, sire, is the duty? What are the noble duties of the real turning monarch? It is this, my son, yourself depending on the Dhamma, honoring it, revering it, cherishing it, doing homage to it, and venerating it, having the Dhamma as your badge and banner, acknowledging the Dhamma as your master. You should establish guard with warmth and protection according to Dhamma for your own household, your troops, your nobles and households, for Brahmins and householders, town and country folk, ascetics and Brahmins, for beasts and birds. Let no crime prevail in your kingdom, and to those who are in need, give property, and whatever ascetics and Brahmins in your kingdom have renounced the life of sensual infatuation and are devoted to forbearance and gentleness, each one taming himself, each one calming himself, and each one striving for the end of craving. From time to time, you should consult them as to what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is blameworthy and what is blameless, what is to be followed and what is not to be followed, and what action will in the long run lead to harm and sorrow, and what to welfare and happiness. You should listen and avoid evil and do what is good. That, my son, is the noble duty of the real turning monarch. So, you may have noticed I did some retranslations there because there are some faults in the translation of this particular sutta. But first of all, you notice that he should live in dependence on the Dhamma. And you may have remembered that even the Buddha did that. After his awakening, the Buddha was asking that, well, how, or rather, who should I now live in dependence on? Because there's nobody in the world who has attained a higher awakening than me. So I can't live in dependence on anybody in the world. So I should live in dependence on this Dhamma that I have discovered. That's what the Buddha said. So even the Buddha lived in dependence on something. That was the Dhamma that he had discovered. Even though he was completely free, he did it. And the same thing is for the king here. The king is like the highest lord on earth at this time. Nobody can be higher than this wheel-turning monarch. And yet the king realizes that everybody needs something they can look up to, something that they can take as a standard, something that they can rely on in life. If all you rely on is your own craving, your own defilements inside, your own judgment, and sometimes you make mistakes. If you have a Dhamma, if you have something you can rely on, you have a guide which guides your life. So this is how we become a non-corrupt leader, if by having a very clear standard for what drives your life. So this is the importance here of the Dhamma. It causes you not to be corrupt. And then you practice the beautiful aspects of the Dhamma. You establish guard, reward, and protection according to Dhamma for everyone, your household, your troops, Brahmins, householders, ascetics and Brahmins, and last of all, even for beasts. Beasts are like animals, right? It's a bit harsh to call them beasts here, but beasts and birds. So animals too. So you protect them, you guard them, you help them. And of course, this is mostly helping and protecting according to Dhamma, so through giving, through generosity, through supporting good ones. Let no crime prevail in your kingdom, and And so you stop crying, but you stop crying in good ones. And the one way to do that is that for those who are in need, you give them properties that don't actually have any needs anymore. You don't have to become criminals to survive, you don't have to steal to survive. So you give them a livelihood so they can actually survive on their own. You give them a job or whatever is required. And then whatever ascetics and Brahmins that have renounced, that are like monks, if you like, all that time, people who are striving to be kind and gentle and emptying craving. It says here, the translation here says that the king should tell them what to do. Actually, it's all the way around. From time to time, you, the king, should consult those ascetics and Brahmins as to what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is blameworthy, etc. So the king, again, takes refuge somewhere else to somebody who is outside of power. Because the good thing about ascetics and Brahmins, ideally, it doesn't always work. But ideally, they're outside of power. Because they're outside of power, they won't be corrupted by power. They can give you like neutral advice on how to live your life without being corrupted by it. So this is the idea here of having an ascetic as a counselor. And you'll see throughout history, this was true for King Ashoka, this has been true for many kings and leaders in history in the Buddhist world. They would have often Buddhist monks, perhaps Buddhist nuns as well, I'm sure, as counselors, to consult with somebody who was outside of the power circle and therefore had this neutrality which they could help out with them. And then you will listen to those people, and you would practice accordingly to what is avoiding the evil and do what is good. This is the noble duty, the Aryan duty of a wheel-turning monarch. It is actually translated here as the Aryan wheel-turning monarch, as well as it's stated in the translation. It's the noble duty, the duty that is noble, not the wheel-turning monarch. Anyway, so then it goes on. Yes, sire, said the king. So the son who was now the king is saying this to his father who was sage. Yes, sire, said the king, and he performed the noble duties of a wheel-turning monarch. As he did so, on the fast day of the 15th, when he had washed his head and gone up to the veranda on top of his palace for the fast day, the sacred wheel treasure appeared to him, 1,000 spokes, complete with fellow hub and all appurtenances. Then the king thought, I have heard that when the duly anointed Catholic king sees such a wheel on the fast day of the 15th, he will become a wheel-turning monarch. May I become such a monarch. Then, rising from his seat and covering one shoulder with his robe, the king took a golden vessel in his left hand and sprinkled the wheel treasure with his right hand and said, May the noble wheel treasure turn, may the noble wheel treasure conquer. And the wheel treasure turned to the east, and the king followed it there with his fourfold army. And in whatever country the wheel stopped, the king took up residence with his fourfold army. And those who opposed him in the eastern region came and said, Come, your majesty, welcome. We are yours, your majesty. Rule us, your majesty. And the king said, Do not take life. Do not take what is not given. Do not commit sexual misconduct. Do not tell lies. Do not drink alcoholic drink. And the last one is something like be moderate according to past times. Those who had opposed him in the eastern region became his subjects. So, first of all, you will notice here that this covering of one shoulder with his robe, this is like the ancient tradition in India. And this is why you see monks even to this day do exactly the same thing. Cover the shoulder with one robe. And bearing one shoulder is like a sign of respect almost. That's why when you bow to the Buddha, and monks bow to the Buddha, always uncovers the shoulder first. If you have a robe over two shoulders, you can always not bow to the Buddha in that situation. And then he says, it's a bit interesting here, he takes his fourfold army there. But then, I'm not sure why he brings the fourfold army, because when he goes to the region, all he says is, keep the 5 precepts. And they all come and say, Your Majesty, rule us. So I'm not sure why he brings the fourfold army. The fourfold army are like the elephant troops, the cavalry troops and the chariot troops and also the infantry, the foot soldiers, the fourth army in those days. And it's quite beautiful that they say, please rule us, Your Majesty, please come. Somehow they would recognize that this person was a noble king that would help them. And because they would help them, they were actually quite keen on being ruled by this king. This is quite different from the way things are these days, when we are more keen on waging war, I think, sometimes. And then he tells them, and again, wonderful, he tells them, keep the 5 precepts that he came for them. And then, same thing happens in other regions. The wheel turns south, west, and north. Then the wheel treasure, having conquered the land from sea to sea, turned to the royal capital and stopped before the king's palace as he was trying the case, as if to adorn the royal palace. And the second wheel-turning monarch did likewise, and a third, a fourth, a fifth, and the 7th king also. And each one of them told the man, and this one again told the man to see it. The wheel had slipped from its positions. Everything is repeated as before now. And 7 days after the world's age had gone forth, the wheel disappeared. And then again, we have the same thing happening as happened before. And then, actually this time things go a little bit differently. But this is how you see now that what is wholesome is disappearing, and what the dangers are when the wholesome starts to disappear. Then a man came to the king and said, Sire, you should know that the sacred wheel treasure had disappeared. At this the king was grieved and felt sad. But he did not go to see the royal sage and ask him about the duties of the wheel-turning monarch. Instead, he ruled the people according to his own ideas. And being so ruled, the people did not prosper so well as they had done under the previous king, who had performed the duties of a wheel-turning monarch. So here you are, you do it according to your own ideas, and inevitably, because you are swayed by defilements, by desire and anger, it will not be as clear a rule as the ideas that are coming from the Dhamma, that come from a pure mind, a pure understanding of things. And because of that, people don't prosper as much, because the rule isn't as good as it otherwise would have been. That the ministers, counselors, treasury officials, guards and doorkeepers, and the chanters of the mantras, of the hymns, if you like, came to the king and said, Sire, as long as you rule the people according to your own ideas, and differently from the way they were ruled before under previous wheel-turning monarchs, in other words, according to Dhamma, the people do not prosper so well. Sire, there are ministers, etc., all the people, minister, counselors, treasury officials, guards and doorkeepers, and chanters of the mantra in your realm, including ourselves, who have preserved the knowledge of how the wheel-turning monarch should rule. Ask us, Your Majesty, and we will tell you. So they're getting concerned that wholesomeness is declining, things are going in the wrong direction. Then the king ordered all his ministers and others to come together and consulted them, and they explained to him the duties of a wheel-turning monarch. And having listened to them, the king established guard and protection, but he did not give property to the needy, and as a result, poverty became rife. With the spread of poverty, the man took what was not given, thus committing what was called theft. They arrested him and brought him before the king, saying, Your Majesty, this man took what was not given, which we call theft. The king said to him, Is it true that you took what was not given, which is called theft? It is, Your Majesty. Why? Your Majesty, I have nothing to live on. Then the king gave the man some property, saying, This, my good man, you can keep yourself, support your mother and father, have a wife and children, carry on the business, and make gifts to ascetics and Brahmins, which will promote your spiritual welfare and lead to a happy rebirth with pleasant result in the heavenly sphere. Very good, Your Majesty, replied the man. So the idea here is that people are poor, and sometimes when you are poor, what you do is steal because of poverty, because you have no other way of keeping yourself alive. And of course, you can understand that. It's not difficult to understand when people get so desperate and they actually steal. So sometimes in a good society supports those people who have a difficult time, a hard time in making a living. Perhaps they are not so intelligent, perhaps they are disabled, perhaps they have a difficult life, some psychological trauma. There's many, many reasons why people can find it difficult to make a living for themselves. So you help them, you support them, and get them going so they can actually live a reasonably good life. And it's very beautiful here the way the king says that he even gives him enough so that he can make gifts to ascetics and Brahmins to promote the spiritual welfare in the future. So it's helping him to say, here's the extra, so that you may give something for your own spiritual welfare. It's a very touching little thing there that we see in the Sutta. And then things start to get worse. And exactly the same thing happened with another man. In other words, somebody else also stole. Then people heard and stole, then he also was given property, right? Then people heard that the king was giving away property to those who took what was not given, and they thought, suppose we were to do likewise. And then another man took what was not given, and then brought it before the king. The king asked him why he had done this, and he replied, Your Majesty, I have nothing to live on. Then the king thought, if I give property to anybody who takes what is not given, this theft will increase more and more. I had better make an end of him, finish him off once and for all, and cut his head off. So he commanded his men, bind this man's arms tightly behind him with a strong rope, shave his head closely, and lead him to the rough sound of a drum, to the streets and squares, and out to the southern gate, and there finish by inflicting the capital penalty and cutting off his head. And they did so. Hearing about this, people thought, now let us get sharp swords made for us, and then we can take from anybody what is not given, which is called theft. We will make an end of them, finish them off once and for all, and cut off their heads. So having procured some sharp swords, they launched murderous assaults on villages, towns, and cities, and went in for highway robbery, killing their victims by cutting off their heads. So I think an important point in this passage here is the power of example. Right? If the king doesn't live well, it has very powerful effects on the rest of society. So if the king is bad, if the king cuts off the heads of people, if the king is not kind and merciful to the people in the country, the people in the country start to think likewise, because the power of example is so important. So this is what we're seeing here. And of course, that is also true for monastics. If people have a faith in a particular religion or in Buddhism or whatever, if the monastics were supposed to be the example of how to live the Dhamma, if they don't live it properly, then that will affect everyone in that community. Okay, so then the Buddha goes on. Thus, from not giving of property to the needy, poverty became right. From the growth of poverty, the taking of what was not given increased. From the increase of theft, the use of weapons increased. From the increased use of weapons, the taking of life increased. And from the increase in the taking of life, people's lifespan decreased. The beauty decreased. And as a result of this decrease of lifespan and beauty, the children of those whose lifespan had been 80,000 years lived from only 40,000. So what is happening here is that it's not so, it almost looks like that people in that society become less long-lived because of all these bad actions. But this almost sounds like karma is like a collective, that everybody acts like this, everybody gets a shorter life. But that's not how karma works according to the Buddha's teaching. The way karma works is that it's an individual thing. So you do that act and you get bad results, not the whole of society that gets bad results. So don't mistake this for, this is not the standard way of explaining the Buddha's teachings. Karma is individual, it's not collective. Individual people get individual results from their own actions. But I think what is happening here is rather that when society becomes more coarse, when people act in the worst way, then living in that society is less pleasant. There's more suffering in that society. Because there is more suffering in that society, people who have bad karma from the past get reborn into that society. And because they have worse karma from the past, they will be shorter lived. They will be less beautiful, as it says here. And all the other things they will be have less of because they have worse karma. So a coarser society tends to attract the rebirth of beings that have worse karma from the past. And then imagine that if a person of bad karma from the past gets reborn there, they bring their own bad habits into that society. And then it gets even worse. And then you get this bad cycle. Things go from bad to worse, further and further down. And this is what we see happening in this particular sutta here. So, the lifespan decreased from 80,000 years to 40,000 years. And the man of the generation that lived 40,000 years took what was not given. He was brought before the king, who asked him, "Is it true that he took what was not given, what is called death?" "No, your Majesty," he replied, thus telling a deliberate lie. Thus, from not giving the property to the needy, etc., the taking of life increased. And from the taking of life, lying increased. And from the increase in lying, people's lifespan decreased further. Their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 40,000 years lived for only 20,000. And the man of the generation that lived for 20,000 years took what was not given. Another man denounced him to the king, saying, "Sire, such and such a man has taken what was not given, by speaking maliciously of another." This is like the courses of unwholesome speech, right? They are lying, and then you have malicious speech. Thus, from not giving the property of the needy, etc., and also before, the speaking maliciously of others increased, and in consequence, people's lifespan decreased even more. The beauty decreased more, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 20,000 years lived only for 10,000. And all the generation that lived for 10,000 years, some were beautiful, and some were ugly. And those who were ugly, being envious of those who were beautiful, committed adultery with others' wives. Thus, from not giving of property, etc., sexual misconduct increased. And in consequence, people's life decreased even more. Beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 10,000 years lived for only 5,000. And among the generation of those who lived for 5,000 years, two things decreased: harsh speech and idle chatter. In consequence of which people's lifespan decreased even more, and beauty decreased more. And as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 5,000 years, some lived for only 2.5, and some for only 2,000 years. So here, you can see here that various things that are being explained here are what elsewhere in the Sutta are called the 10 courses of unwholesome action. The Dasa Akusala Kamapata is known in the Pali. And this is the explanation of the Buddha of basically everything that is unwholesome. And that is usually divided into three aspects: the unwholesomeness of the body, unwholesomeness of speech, and lastly, the unwholesomeness of mind. And the unwholesomeness of the body is the killing of living beings, it is the taking, the stealing, and taking what is given, and the sexual misconduct. So the three bodily misconducts have already been covered now. And then we have the four verbal misconducts, which are lying, malicious speech, where you talk badly about others, harsh speech where you're harsh towards others, and lastly, idle chatter, just talking things which are meaningless and pointless. So these four have also been covered now. So gradually here, we're going through these 10 different ways and also actions that the Buddha is talking about elsewhere in the suttas. So really everything that's in also is being covered here. So next, of course, we have now covered the bodily unwholesomeness and the verbal unwholesomeness, and now the mental unwholesomeness remains. And among the generation, whose lifespan was 2,500 years, desire and hatred increased, and in consequence, people's lifespan decreased, the beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those people lived for only 1,000 years. Among the generation whose lifespan was 1,000 years, wrong views increased. Wrong views is the last one here of those mental bad practices. And as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 1,000 years lived only for 500. And then, having covered all the 10 bad ways of practice, now we come to some extra bad ways which are added on to this particular sutta, which are not really found elsewhere. And among the generation who lived only 500 years, 3 things increased: incest, excess, excessive greed, and deviant practices. And as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 500 years, some lived only 250, and some only 200. And among those, these things increased: lack of respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, and for the head of the clan. Thus, from not giving the property to the needy, etc., the whole sequence of things is put in there. Lack of respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, and for the head of the clan increased. And in consequence, people's lifespan and youth decreased. And the children of those whose lifespan had been 2.5 centuries lived for only 100 years. Now we're coming back to where we are today, basically 100 years lifespan. It's less today, isn't it? Okay, so we're using words on this, okay. Alright, so we're getting in the kind of ballpark. So, once the time will come when the children of those people will have a lifespan of 10 years. And with them, girls will be marriageable at 5 years old. And with them, these flavors will disappear: ghee, butter, sesame oil, molasses, and salt. Among them, kudrusa grain will be the chief food, just as rice and curry are today. And with them, the 10 courses of moral conduct will completely disappear, and the 10 courses of evil that we have just seen will prevail exceedingly. For those of 10-year lifespan, there will be no word for moral. The word moral won't exist. So how can there be anyone who acts in a moral way? Those people who have no respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, for the head of the clan, will be the ones who enjoy honor and prestige, just as it is now the people who show respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, for the head of the clan, who are praised and honored. So it will be with those who do the opposite in the future. So people are getting more and more coarse. So what that means is that the karma that it takes to be reborn as this kind of person, you need less and less good karma to be reborn as this kind of person, because the life is so brutal and so coarse, so becoming more like animals than human beings. And because the type of karma that is required to be reborn there isn't that good, it means that the life you have is very unfair. That's why the flavors disappear, right? Because you can't enjoy yourself when you have so much bad karma. And these flavors that I mentioned here, ghee, butter, sesame oil, presumably these were considered the high flavors at the time of the Buddha. These are the things that you enjoyed when you were really enjoying yourself. And And the Kudrusa grain is some kind of coarse grain that were eaten by these people because of their bad karma. And interesting, the word moral disappeared. In other words, not only the word, but the idea of moral disappeared. Because they weren't thinking in those terms anymore. They were just being very harsh and brutal against each other. And the people who had honor and prestige were particularly the people who were brutal, who were not kind, who didn't really practice the right way. And that is what happens. Even today, you can see that sometimes in certain societies and certain circumstances, maybe in like the mafia or whatever, it's the brutal people who are often honored because of the mafia circle is very brutal life. You have to prove yourself through brutality. But in whole society, it becomes a bit like that. So it becomes very harsh, very unpleasant. And then the Buddha goes on. Among those of a 10-year lifespan, no account will be taken of mother or aunt, of mother, sister-in-law, or teacher's wife, or of one's father's wife, and so on. All will be promiscuous in the world, like goats and sheep, cows and pigs, dogs and jackals. Among them, fierce enmity will prevail, one for another, fierce hatred, fierce anger, and thoughts of killing, mother against child, child against mother, father against child, child against father, brother against brother, brother against sister, just as a hunter gives hatred for the beast that he stalks. So, doesn't sound very nice. And for those of a 10-year lifespan, there will come to be a sword interval of 7 days, during which they will mistake one another for wild beasts. Sharp swords will appear in their hands. And thinking, there is the wild beast, they will take each other's lives with those swords. But there will be some beings who will think, let us not kill or be killed by anyone. Let us make for some grassy thickets or jungle recesses or lumps of trees, for rivers hard to ford, or inaccessible mountains, and live on roots and fruits of the forest. And this they will do for 7 days. Then, at the end of the 7 days, they will emerge from their hiding places and rejoice together of one accord, saying, good beings, I see that you are alive. And then the thought will occur to those beings. It is only because we became addicted to evil ways that we suffered the loss of our kindred, of our family. So let us now do good. What good things can we do? Let us abstain from the taking of life. That would be a good practice. And so they will abstain from the taking of life. And undertaking this good thing, they practice it, and to have undertaken such unwholesome thing, they will increase in lifespan and beauty. And the children of those whose lifespan was 10 years will live for 20 years. So here there comes a point in things when we become so terrible that some people just decide to go apart and they realize that they have this is not going to work out anymore. We have to change our ways, otherwise society is going to collapse. It's not going to function. So if this is a turning point, the society becomes better again. Then slowly they start to practice the wholesome ways. So now the good cycle comes around. Now you get a good cycle, because then from practicing good ways, then the people who get reborn in that society, people with better karma, because the society is better, you get better karma to be reborn there. People with better karma are people who have better lives, people with better habits. So they will again create a better society, and then you get this good cycle coming and happening. Then it will occur to these beings. It is through having taken to wholesome practices that we have increased in lifespan and beauty. So let us perform still more wholesome practices. Let us refrain from taking what is not given, from sexual misconduct, from lying, from slander, from hard speech, and from idle chatter, from desire, from covetousness or desire to like, from ill will, and from wrong views. Let us abstain from 3 things: incest, excessive greed, and deviant practices. Let us respect our mothers and fathers, ascetics and Brahmins, and the head of the clan, and let us persevere in these wholesome actions. And so, they will do these things, and on account of this, they will increase in lifespan and in beauty. And the children of those whose lifespan is 20 to 20 years will live for 40. Their children will live to 80. Their children to 160. Their children to be 120. And their children to be 640. And the children of those whose lifespan is 640 years will live for 2,000 years. Their children for 4,000. Their children for 8,000. And their children for 20,000. And their children for 40,000. And their children again for 80,000 years. Now we have come full cycle back to where we started. And of course, when that happens, then we start to get people like the wheel-turning monarchs start to realize that again in the world, because the wheel-turning monarchs are people with great good karma, and these have a chance to rise when the lifespan is very long, and the karma to get to rise there is need very good karma to rise there. Among the people with 80,000 year lifespan, girls will become marriageable at 500, and such people will know only 3 kinds of disease: desire, hunger, and old age. And in the time of those people, this continent of Jambudvipa will be powerful and prosperous, and villages, towns, and cities will be but a God's light one from the next. This Brahmali, like the Vichy, this is the hell realm, like the Vichy, will be as thick with people as the jungle is thick with reeds and rushes. At that time, the Varanasi of today, this is the Banaras that we find in India today, will be a royal city called Chetawan, powerful and prosperous, crowded with people, well supplied. In Jambudvipa, there will be 84,000 cities headed by Chetawan as the royal capital. And then you have one last paragraph for now at least. And in the time of the people, 80,000 years lifespan, there will arise in the capital city of Chetawan a king called Sanka, a wheel-turning monarch, a righteous monarch of the law, conqueror of the 4 quarters. There you are. Now we're back to square one where we started off. This is what happens in between if you're not careful. So the thing here is obviously to show that basically that unwholesome conduct, bad conduct, tends to take on the life of its own. It leads in the bad direction. Things get worse and worse because you don't have a teaching, you don't have a dharma, you don't have something to guide you in this thing. So things get worse and worse and worse. This is like the kind of standard Buddhist view of society. You don't have clear guidance or clear teachings. Yes, sir. Yeah. Possibly. It's not clear whether this is a kappa or this. I think it's not even clear that this is meant to describe the way the world actually is. This could be just a parable. It could be like a story, a legend that they tell to make a point of morality. I'm not sure if this is actually meant as a literal understanding of how the world works. But it could be a kappa. But the thing is, these are not very clearly defined by Suttas, what actually is a kappa and what isn't. But it is a kind of kappa, because kappa just means like a cycle of things, right? So it could be a certain type of kappa, I suppose. So, yeah. Anyway, we have been going for an hour now, and it's a long time already. So I think I will stop there, and then we'll move on. Some interesting stuff happening after this, which people are ready. So we'll just stretch our legs a little bit, do a bit of meditation, and then we'll come back to this.